watching A News. I'm Katie Wilson. Here are the top stories for today. Stock markets in Asia and Europe have had a rough start to the week, with major indexes showing a decline. US tariffs are causing global concern. More than 50 countries have contacted the White House to start trade talks. South Korea's cabinet is set to approve the 3rd of June as the date for the presidential election. World markets are in free fall after President Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on over 180 countries. Major Asian and European stock indexes saw historic losses, with Taiwan and Hong Kong hit especially hard.
Global stock markets, commodities and digital assets have taken a sharp hit in the wake of sweeping new US tariffs, signed into effect last week by President Donald Trump. The executive order imposes reciprocal tariffs ranging from 10% to 50% on more than 180 countries, triggering widespread economic panic.
What's going to happen with the market, I can't tell you, but I can tell you our country has gotten a lot stronger. And eventually, it'll be a country like no other. It'll be the most dominant country economically in the world.
Among the hardest hit are Asian and European markets, where major indexes saw historic one-day losses. As global manufacturing hubs, many Asian economies are directly exposed to the impact of the tariffs. Taiwan's stock market saw a dramatic 10% drop on Monday, marking its largest one-day percentage fall on record. The crash prompted a statement from the island's stabilization fund, which holds around 500 billion Tongan Paanga in assets, indicating it may step in if needed to restore market confidence. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index plunged 13.2%, one of the worst single-day performances in its history. Markets in Shanghai, Tokyo and Sydney also fell sharply as investors reacted to the sweeping trade measures. In Europe, the impact has been just as severe. France halted all banking operations on its stock exchange after a 6.5% drop, while Germany's DAX index plummeted by 10% at one point, prompting the incoming chancellor to call the situation dramatic and threatening to deteriorate further. In London, the FTSE 100 fell by 4.9%, adding to the continent-wide sell-off. The tariffs affect a wide range of countries. Even traditional allies such as Japan, India and the EU were not spared. A handful of countries, including the UK, Brazil, Australia and the UAE, received the lowest tier of 10% tariffs. No tariffs were placed on heavily sanctioned nations like Russia, Cuba, Belarus or North Korea, while even uninhabited islands such as Heard and McDonald Islands made the list. As global markets reel, fears are mounting over the potential for a prolonged downturn. Economists warn that the widespread disruption to trade and investor confidence could have long-lasting effects on global economic growth.
President Trump said that sometimes you have to take medicine when asked about the pain of the markets, adding that he was not intentionally engineering a market sell-off. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One on Sunday, Trump said he would not make a deal unless the trade deficit with China is solved. He added that he had spoken to European and Asian leaders about the tariffs.
Hundreds of billions of dollars a year we lose with China. And unless we solve that problem, I'm not going to make a deal. Now, I'm willing to deal with China, but they have to solve their surplus. We have a tremendous deficit problem with China. They have a surplus of at least $1 trillion a year. I think it's like $1.1 trillion. And I want that solved.
Europe, is that a place you'd like to also get to?
Well, the problem is that Europe has made a fortune with us. You know, Europe also has had a tremendous surplus with the United States. Europe has treated us, it's a little smaller, but they've treated us very, very badly. China has, but Europe has also. Europe has been very, very bad to us. Europe has taken our leaders for a ride. They don't take our cars. They don't take our food products. They don't take anything.
Is there pain in the market at some point? You're unwilling to tolerate this idea of a Trump put. Is there a threshold?
I think your question is so stupid. I mean, I think it's I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix up.
Well, tariffs imposed by President Trump are sparking global concern, with over 50 countries reaching out to the White House to begin trade talks, according to a Trump advisor. While some nations have chosen not to retaliate, experts warn that these tariffs could drive up prices, cause economic instability, and potentially trigger a global recession.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is visiting Washington, D.C. to discuss US tariffs with President Donald Trump. This visit could be the first effort by a foreign leader to negotiate a deal in person with Trump to remove tariffs.
I can tell you that I am the first international leader that is meeting with Trump in regards to such an important issue to the Israeli economy. There is a long line of international leaders waiting to meet with Trump in regards to their economies. I think it shows the personal connection and the connection between our countries that is so essential in this time.
In related discussions, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron affirmed their resolve to work together on tariff issues with Trump. Macron emphasised that a trade war is in no one's interest, stressing unity for the benefit of citizens and businesses. China has responded by imposing a 34% tariff on all US imports starting April 10th as part of its retaliation against the US's tariff policies. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that trade wars harm all parties, especially vulnerable countries.
He said it before. He said it more than a month ago, that in a trade war, nobody wins, right? Our concern right now is that with the most vulnerable countries who are the least equipped to deal with the current situation.
Meanwhile, countries like Indonesia, Taiwan and India have decided not to retaliate against US tariffs. Trade experts have criticised the US for imposing reciprocal tariffs, warning of potential backlash and negative effects on domestic inequality. They warned that the policy would ultimately hurt the consumers.
Ordinary working Americans will pay for a tax cut that will be enjoyed by a small number. But I would say that the long-run effect of this is bound to be that more and more countries will shift their trade away from the United States.
On Wednesday, US President Trump signed an executive order imposing a 10% minimum tariff on all imports, with higher rates for selected nations. If the tariffs take effect as planned, American families are expected to face higher prices on imported goods, particularly clothing and footwear, as most of these products are imported from Asia. Companies like Walmart, Gap and Nike could see significant price increases. Markets worldwide saw a major downturn this week, with US stocks experiencing their worst performance since the 2020 pandemic. Analysts warn that Trump's tariffs could lead to a global recession, with losses in US stock markets reaching $5 trillion. While companies like Apple and Nike suffered losses, small US businesses face potential closures. Despite the economic turmoil, Trump has defended his tariff approach.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington, D.C. He's already met with US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and he hopes President Trump will ease the tariffs imposed on Tel Aviv when the two meet. Israeli goods face a 17% tax hike. Netanyahu, who has spent the last few days visiting Hungary, said that the talks will also cover the hostages still held in Gaza after 18 months. Well, to discuss the visit of Prime Minister Netanyahu to the United States, Rachel Abraham, CEO of the Donna Grazia Centre for Diplomacy, joins us live from Jerusalem. Rachel, thank you for joining us. So, in your view, how important is it for Benjamin Netanyahu to reach an agreement with Trump on easing these tariffs? And how likely do you think that is?
I think it is very, very important that an agreement be reached in order to solve this problem, because between 15,000 and 26,000 Israelis are expected to lose their jobs because of these tariffs. And aside from the whole number that are losing their jobs, up to $3 billion of profits in Israel are expected to be lost because of these tariffs. And this comes at a time when Israel is at a war, when there were just 10 rockets that were sent here within the last day. And this is just a very bad timing for us, all of these tariffs. The shekel is plummeting relative to the dollar already, and average Israelis are already feeling the hunch.
And of course, these talks between Netanyahu and Trump are going to focus on Gaza also. And what are the key issues here that the leaders are likely to focus on?
Returning the hostages in exchange for a limited ceasefire that will allow us to finish the Passover holiday without rocket fire, and for more hostages out of the 56 remaining to be returned home.
Really key issues there. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us and for your insight.
Thank you.
Well, protesters have gathered outside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem whilst he's visiting the US. They're demanding immediate action to bring home the 59 hostages still held in Gaza.
Hundreds of people protested outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home in Jerusalem on Monday, marking 18 months since the October the 7th attack. They're calling not only for the return of the remaining hostages, but also for a ceasefire, an end to the war, and the protection of Israel's democratic institutions. Among them was Gil Dickman, who has a cousin still being held in captivity in the Strip.
We're here near the Prime Minister Netanyahu's house 1 year and a half after October 7th. 59 hostages are still in captivity, and we call upon the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Israel to bring them all home now. It's been too long.
Israel renewed its operation after a 2-month ceasefire that allowed the return of 38 hostages in exchange for nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, but it failed to extend and ended on the 1st of March. Now Tel Aviv is focusing on sending troops to build a new security corridor across southern Gaza, creating what the military are calling security zones.
Now to Gaza, where new video evidence has emerged of the killing of 15 Palestinian emergency workers near Rafah. The footage, recovered from a victim's phone, appears to contradict the Israeli military's original account, as it shows paramedics in clearly marked vehicles under fire. Both the United Nations and the Palestinian Red Crescent are now calling for an independent international investigation, saying this may amount to a war crime.
The Palestinian Red Crescent on Sunday called for an independent international investigation into the killing of 15 emergency workers near the southern Gaza city of Rafah last month. The demand comes after newly released video footage appeared to contradict the Israeli military's version of events. The paramedics and emergency responders were shot dead on March the 23rd and buried in a shallow grave. Their bodies were discovered a week later by officials from the United Nations and the Palestinian Red Crescent. One man remains unaccounted for.
Accountability should never require video evidence. It should not take a global outrage for the truth to be acknowledged. The truth was always there. The Palestinian Red Crescent medics were wearing their Red Crescent emblem. They were wearing their uniforms and they were driving ambulances that were clearly marked, and all emergency lights were on. Now the Palestinian Red Crescent Society calls for an independent international investigation. We need justice for the victims, and we need to ensure that all of those who are responsible are held to account. Without this, the crimes will continue to happen. Without this, the systematic targeting for humanitarians, aid workers, and medics will continue to happen.
The organisation is calling it a deliberate attack on humanitarian workers.
These are crimes against humanity and war crimes. The international community must intervene and compel Israel to respect international humanitarian law, which prohibits targeting medical personnel and ambulances during conflict.
The Israeli officials initially claimed that its forces had opened fire on vehicles that approached their position in what they described as suspiciously in the dark, without lights or identification. According to their account, 9 militants from Hamas and Islamic Jihad were travelling in Palestinian Red Crescent vehicles. The United Nations also demanding an independent international investigation into the incident.
Hamas says it fired a barrage of rockets at southern Israeli cities on Sunday. Israel's military says about 10 projectiles were fired, with most of them intercepted. However, a direct hit was reported in Ashkelon, where emergency services treated one person for shrapnel injuries. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called for a vigorous response to the latest barrage. Meanwhile, Gaza local health authorities say Israeli military strikes have killed at least 39 people yesterday. And for more on this, joining us live from Ramallah is Mohammed Najib. Thanks for joining us, Mohammed. So, as we understand, Israel has now retaliated for what it described as one of the heaviest barrages of rocket fire by Hamas. What are your thoughts on this?
The Israeli armed forces resumed a military operation in Gaza more than 2 weeks ago, and since that time, they targeting civilians, even the humanitarian staff like the Red Crescent and journalists and UN international organization workers. So they are using the starvation as weapons against the Palestinians in Gaza, prevent the entry of any kind of food, drinkable water, medicine, fuel, everything. So the people of Gaza are suffering because of the Israeli military operations. And when they use that, as well as when Hamas also fire rockets, those who suffer are the civilians in both sides, not the IDF or the Hamas fighters.
Now, you mentioned the case of the journalist that was killed as a result of the strikes. The IDF and Shin Bet have said that he was a Hamas terrorist operating under the guise of a journalist and owns a press company. Could you tell me more about this case and what you make of it?
Actually, this is not a new allegation. Since the outbreak of the war, when they target journalists, they say they are affiliated with the Palestinian organizations or with the TV channels that Israel don't like their coverage, like Al Jazeera and other stations. So they have excuse to target journalists, but journalists shouldn't be a target for that. And yesterday, when they targeted the tent where many journalists were gathering in, they also injured others and killed others. It's not just one single journalist who they claim he was affiliated with Hamas, but also they target other journalists, and journalists feel they have unsafe place to conduct their work and the role to report to the world from Gaza, taking in consideration that since the outbreak of the war in October 23 right now, Israel doesn't allow any international press to go into Gaza. So the whole world depends on those local journalists to report over what's going there for the past 16, 17 months.
Yeah, really key issues there as well, Mohammed. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, the Kremlin says that Russia is ready to do all it can to help resolve tensions between the United States and Iran around Tehran's nuclear program. The move comes as Washington demands a deal from Tehran or warns of military action. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says that Russia is actively engaged with Iran and urges restraint on both sides. Moscow says the nuclear program should be resolved politically and diplomatically. However, Iran says it needs nuclear energy for peaceful purposes and denies it is seeking to acquire nuclear weapons. South Korea's cabinet is set to approve a date for the upcoming presidential election for the 3rd of June. The decision follows the removal of President Yoon Suk-yeol from office last week after his martial law declaration violated his duties. A new election must be held within 60 days after a president's removal. The final date will become official only when it is declared by acting president and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. After months of tension, France and Algeria have resumed diplomatic talks. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot met with his Algerian counterpart Ahmed Attaf in Algiers on Sunday, aiming to rebuild strained relations. It's after months of stalemate which has hurt Paris's economic and security interests in its former colony.
France and Algeria ties are back to normal. That's according to Paris after French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot met his Algerian counterpart Ahmed Attaf in Algiers on Sunday. The meeting follows a phone call between the leaders of both countries back in March, during which they agreed on a roadmap to stabilise ties. This follows earlier attempts in 2022 to reset relations through cooperation protocols. It marks the restart of diplomatic talks between the two countries after months of tension. The rift deepened last year when French President Emmanuel Macron supported Morocco's autonomy plan for Western Sahara, angering Algeria. Since the summer, trade between the two nations has dropped by 30%, with French officials saying that Algiers adopted a policy that aimed to wipe France's economic presence from the country. The situation worsened when Franco-Algerian author Boualem Sansal was detained by Algerian authorities last November and later sentenced to 5 years in prison. Diplomats say that Paris hopes he will be given a presidential pardon. The relationship between the two countries is scarred by the trauma of the 1954 to 1962 war, in which the North African country, which had a large settler population and was treated as an integral part of France under colonial rule, won independence.
Technical work begins this week in Sofia on the Azerbaijan, Turkey, Georgia, Bulgaria Green Energy Corridor. This project follows a memorandum signed in Baku on Friday, where 4 nations pledged to boost cooperation on renewables and electricity trade. The energy ministries will work to enhance cooperation between the public and private sectors. They'll focus on modernising energy systems and launching joint investment projects. The corridor is expected to strengthen regional energy ties and accelerate transition to clean energy across the region. Hungarian energy company MVM has begun negotiations on potential investments in Azerbaijan's renewable energy sector. According to MVM's CEO, their presence in Azerbaijan initially stemmed from the Shah Deniz project, and the company is now exploring new opportunities in the country's growing green energy market. He also stated that MVM sees Azerbaijan as a strategic partner in the region and expressed the company's hope to contribute meaningfully to the development of the country's sustainable energy sector. The 150th Assembly of the Interparliamentary Union is being held in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. It brings all IPU statutory bodies together, including the Governing Council and various committees. The general debate centres on parliamentary action for social development and justice, with resolutions on peace, international security and sustainable development. A trilateral mechanism for interparliamentary cooperation will be established between the parliaments of Turkey, Azerbaijan and Georgia. This agreement was reached during a meeting between the Speaker of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey, Numan Kurtulmuş, and his Georgian counterpart in Tashkent. Kurtulmuş says that they are interested in utilising all diplomatic opportunities to expand their ties, and he hopes to establish a friendship group with Turkey in the Georgian parliament. Rabbi Mark Schneier, a prominent interfaith leader, commented on Israel's I24 News about the recently filed Iranian plot to assassinate Rabbi Shneur Segal. chief rabbi of the Ashkenazi community in Baku. He praised the swift and effective response of Azerbaijan's security services, describing it as a stellar example of the country's dedication to protecting its Jewish community. In January, Azerbaijan's state security service reported that they foiled a terrorist plot targeting the Jewish community in Baku, arresting 18-year-old Abdullah Aliyev linked to ISIS Khorasan. Authorities say Aliyev planned an attack on the Baku Mountain Jew synagogue and a local Jewish education centre, carrying Molotov cocktails, knives and an axe when apprehended.
Well, the star of the plot is the president of Azerbaijan, President Aliyev. You know, when we think of Azerbaijan, as I have repeatedly shared on your show, that of the 57 Muslim nations, I believe Azerbaijan is Israel's greatest supporter. At the same time, President Aliyev has this extraordinary commitment and reverence for the Jewish community of Azerbaijan. They're close to 25,000 Jews who lead a very prosperous Jewish life in Baku and other cities and regions in Azerbaijan. It is yet again a testament to President Aliyev in terms of his commitment not only to the state of Israel, but to the Jewish people as a whole. I think it's the safest place for Jews. It's a country that has no anti-Semitism. It's remarkable that this is a Jewish community. Some people believe it's close to 2,000 years that the Jewish community has been present in Azerbaijan, going back to the days of the exile after the First Holy Temple. Nevertheless, it is a very, very safe place for Jews, not only who are living there, but for the tens of thousands of Jews that visit Azerbaijan, Baku, and their mountainous region.
You are watching A News. Stay tuned for more and have a wonderful day.